Boom, there we go. Give everybody another second to jump on. Boy, it's been a busy week with, the market shifting has sure created some unusual questions for Blake and I. It's been yeah, it's been a weird week. It's been a weird month. Hmm. Now there, we got Cy on there. We're getting some guys. We're getting some guys. You're not outnumbered anymore.
That's okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we're gathering a few. Yeah, the buyer broker thing is going to be interesting, but more to follow on that. Well, we're waiting for everybody to jump on. Anybody got a quick have or want, and then we'll move on. Nope. Going once. New listing. Got a buyer you can't find something for? All right.
I have a new listing that will be going on Monday in Oak Harbor.
Okay, what is it?
4-bed, 2.25 bath, 1,924 square feet on an acre, 1.2 acre lot, 5 minutes from the Navy base, and a cute little complex.
Price?
It'll be listed at $549,900.
Cool.
Gabrielle and I are still looking for a buyer for our concrete listing. It's 3-bedroom, 2-bath, manufactured home, and it's $299 now. So if you've got a buyer that wants to be out in concrete,
$299, affordable housing at its finest. There you go. Anybody else?
I listed a new place down in Camino, nice
Okay.
Rambler, 20 square feet on 2.5 acres for $789.
Nice. Okay. What else? Anything? Got some listings coming on. Are they sitting a little bit longer these days, is what I'm hearing? Yeah, people are kind of freaking out because they don't have offers and showings and everything else. The market has shifted. So I've had a couple people reach out. They want me to do, God, I call it contract boot camp, but we got another name for it that Tessa Jarvis came up with, and I can't think of it, but I'll probably be doing another one of those with a different spin, because the last time we did it, we were talking about escalation clauses and 22 EFs and 22 ADs and all that good stuff. Well, we're kind of going a different direction these days, and we're getting offers, where we're getting seller concessions, interest rate buy downs, financing concessions. Seller wants to stay beyond closing, they pay. We're getting back to normal, which for anybody who's started in the business in the last couple of years isn't going to know what that is, because what we had in the last couple of years was not normal. 8. Yeah. All right, we got 30. Let's start. Let's get rolling. So it looks like Joelle, and Julie Osborne already doing a deal. And Patricia Farley, Scott and she have 2 properties in Oak Harbor. One's 575 and the other is 465, both with large fenced yards centrally located. So contract mastery. Thank you, Tessa Jarvis. Yes. So we're going to cover some different things this morning. We've talked about the forms changing in October. With the now, I don't know how many of you have sat through the multiple class, the NWMLS class on the forms changes. They've offered it a few times. If you haven't, I strongly suggest you sign up for it when they offer it again, because we're going to have some pretty major changes coming down the pike. The buyer commission, or the buyer broker commission, is going to now be listed on the front page of the purchase and sale agreement. And so the old adage of if you work with me, you're not paying me, it's all free, the seller pays it, is kind of, it's going to create some different conversations. I was invited, and this is a little heads up, not for public knowledge, but I was invited to sit on a Washington State Realtor Committee, which I honestly didn't know what it was about. Lasted a couple hours. And what happened, or what it is about, and you guys are the first to hear this, and nothing is formalized yet, but Washington Realtors is going to be proposing a legislative change to the agency law coming in spring. So it's going to be a lot more than what we're seeing the Northwest Multiple Forms changes enact with buyer agency. But one of the proposals they're kicking around is that all buyers now must sign either a buyer agency agreement or a non-agency agreement. The good news is it's going to limit, hopefully, people sitting open houses, listing brokers sitting open houses saying, well, you buy through me and I'll cut my commission. And what they don't know is they're not represented. But there's going to be some pretty major changes coming in the next 9 months, I'm going to say, 12 months. So Blake and I, it's our job to prepare you guys. And so this morning, I wanted to start with a little video of Annie's, and then I've asked Tessa and Rachel to both be on this call and kind of go through their scripts of how they get buyers to sign, or how they get a buyer agency agreement signed, and how that works. I see Kelly's on the call. I know she has her team working on those buyer agency agreements. So that is kind of a direction. You're going to hear us talking a lot about that. And so the first thing I want to do is do a short video of Annie's. It was on professionalism for the broker who wants a career and not just a job. And the title is Part 6, Buyer Broker Commissions. All of these are up on our private Facebook page, so you know. I'm going to screen share here. And oh, wait a minute. I'm going to stop this. I forgot to check a box. Sorry. Were you guys, could you see the video?
No.
No? All right. I'll do it a different way. There we go. Optimized. Boom. Oh. What happened? That was weird. My whole screen just went blank. Huh. Okay, let's try it again.
Series on professionalism for the broker who wants to make real estate a career and not just a job. And I am grateful to be joined once more by my friend Camden Schutte.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Camden Schutte with 360 Property Management and Coldwell Banker 360 team on Whidbey Island.
So Camden asked me a question a little while ago. The question was, do you remember the question?
I think so.
Go for it.
Yeah, I was really curious to hear your thoughts on our changing industry, or some changes that might come to our industry, specifically around buyer broker commissions, because it's been in the news and a hot topic lately.
Yeah, and his question specifically was, do you think there's going to come a time when buyers are required to pay the buyer broker compensation?
Yep.
And the answer that I gave him was, I have no clue how this evolves, but it will evolve. And I am absolutely certain that we will see short-term changes. By short-term, I mean within the next year, 18 months at least. And I think that we're going to see some longer-term changes within the next 5 years. And I think that we are going to, and I think some of those changes are going to be substantial. ultimately, you guys are going to keep doing what you've always been doing, advocating on behalf of sellers as listing brokers, advocating on behalf of buyers as buyer brokers, bringing the two parties together and heading to the closing table.
Absolutely.
That's not going to change. But what I do think is going to change is how that conversation is shaped between buyer brokers and buyers.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, with as much publicity as some of these lawsuits and DOJ investigations and different things happening, it's important for us to communicate. And I think buyer brokers will have now, even now, have forever changed how they communicate about how they get compensated.
They should have. I mean, one of the focuses of the investigations originally, and I think this was initially a DOJ probe, but the question that was on the table was, how can buyer brokers represent to buyers, my services are free, right? You don't pay anything for my services. And we all know that that's something that at least some buyer brokers have said in the past, and that should be out of the conversation of every buyer broker at this point. If it's not, get it out
Absolutely.
of your conversation.
Absolutely.
Because Camden, unpack that a little bit. If the buyer is not writing a check for the buyer broker's commission, are the buyer broker's services free to that buyer? And if not, why not?
Well, is the buyer broker being compensated? And we all know the answer is yes. And where do those funds come from? Ultimately, regardless of how it's presented, the funds come from the buyer for everyone's compensation. And so to say that you're free to the buyer, it's built into what they pay to purchase the home and what the seller is listing their home for in order to net what they want.
Right. So buyer is paying the real estate compensation. They're paying it through the purchase price, and then the seller takes part of their seller proceeds. Okay, so we're not telling anybody anything they don't already know.
Right.
The question is, buyers, how much of that, brokers, how much of that conversation are you having with your buyers? And I think that's ultimately the only answer to this question I can give you, which
Yep.
the answer is to say, I don't know where we ultimately land, but I know that the path to getting there, wherever it is that we end, wherever this journey ends, I know that the journey involves improved conversation.
Absolutely. And, the buyer broker agreement is one of the best ways to get that conversation in front of your buyer. I heard in a former video, I heard Peely talk about how a client was working with an agent for a long time and then went to an open house and then bought the home, and they ran into him and said, "Hey, are you still looking?" "Oh, I already bought a house." "I didn't know you didn't get compensated if I bought a house. I thought you got paid an hourly wage or something." What better opportunity to have that conversation with your buyer of how you as a buyer broker are compensated, regardless of if they pay it directly and our industry goes that way or stays exactly how it is now. That's your opportunity to have that conversation and create some loyalty between your buyer and you.
Yeah, so Form 41A,
Yep.
the buyer agency agreement. Camden, I couldn't agree with you more. The importance of brokers utilizing the buyer agency agreement with their buyers, it's important now, and it's going to increase in importance. Again, I don't know where this journey ends, but one aspect of this journey is going to be improved conversation,
Yep.
meaning transparency between buyer brokers and buyers, and more utilization of that buyer agency agreement. And Camden has touched on one aspect of the buyer agency agreement, and that's education,
Yep.
right? Using that buyer agency agreement as a platform to educate your buyer, because buyers don't know how brokers are compensated. They don't understand that if they utilize 3 months of the buyer broker's time looking at houses and then buy from the listing broker at an open house, that the buyer agent is not going to be compensated. Unless, buyer broker, you've educated your buyer about that issue and you've told them, you've prepared them in advance what to do in that scenario.
Yeah.
Along with, what does the agency mean in that scenario? Buyer, right now, I represent you. I have your highest and best interest, and I have a duty of loyalty to you. I'm going to take no action that's adverse or detrimental to your interests alone, buyer. But if you write an offer with the seller, with the listing broker, at best, you've got a dual agent, which means that dual agent is basically a conveyor of information. They can't advocate your interest because they can't take They have a duty not to take any action that's adverse or detrimental to either interest of either party in the transaction, meaning they can't advocate for either party.
Yeah, not to mention the confidentiality they have to keep for both parties. So
Right.
they can't help you negotiate either.
Right. So at best, you've got a dual agent, right?
Yep.
Worse, you've got no agency because the person who's writing the offer represents a seller. So buyer, here's what you need to do in that scenario. And then you give phone numbers and email addresses, and how are you going to text me? And what if it's late at night, or what if it's early in the morning?
You
And
give the agency pamphlet.
and you get that buyer agency agreement signed.
Absolutely.
Right?
And we live in a part of the country that's leading in some of these conversations. Like I think it was 2009 when we didn't have to put in a buyer broker compensation.
2019.
2019, thank you. Compensation to get it into the MLS. Well, now that buyer agency agreement became important if we needed to negotiate buyer broker compensation. And how is any buyer going to know that again if we don't communicate it with them? So I agree with your take that no matter where it goes, the conversation and the education of our clients,
Yeah.
and it needs to start now so we're ahead of it.
Yeah, you just reminded me of something. The other thing that buyer agency agreement does is it helps the buyer to convert their obligation to, or their choice to pay compensation to their buyer broker into a closing cost. And it's easy, contractually easy, for a buyer to ask a seller to pay the buyer's closing costs. It's not nearly so simple to ask a seller to increase the compensation offered to a selling office or to pay compensation to a selling office if there's no compensation that's negotiated yet. And so buyer brokers, when you have that buyer agency agreement with your buyer, you give your buyer the benefit of being able to then say, this obligation that I have to pay compensation to my broker at closing, that's a closing cost. That is now a cost that I have to endure at closing. It's a closing cost. Seller, I'm asking you to pay my closing costs or some portion of my closing costs sufficient to compensate my broker. And that's useful if there's no compensation offered from the seller, or if there's less compensation offered from the seller than what your buyer has agreed to pay you.
Absolutely. That form is a great opportunity for conversation.
Yeah. So brokers, changes are coming. Neither of us can tell you exactly what those changes are going to be, but I can guarantee you that you are going to need to improve your conversation with buyers around your compensation, increasing the transparency of what it is that you are earning in a transaction. Do you think, Camden, that there might come a time when if a buyer knows how much a buyer broker is earning, they might ask that buyer broker to take less?
Oh, absolutely. And that's already something that we're seeing in the fact that it's more transparent, being in IDX feeds and on websites now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, buyer brokers, that could happen. Your buyer could ask you to take less for their benefit. And then you're going to have to decide whether or not you want to do that. That's part of your negotiation with the buyer about representing them.
Yep. And what better time to do that than at the start of the process in a buyer agency agreement?
At the start of the process, meaning before you spent a bunch of your time, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. Anything else we should talk about here?
I don't think so. We could,
I'm sorry, designated brokers, work with your brokers to understand the importance of the Form 41A and also how to use it.
yeah.
Camden, do you guys train in your office how to present the Form 41A to buyers?
Absolutely, because it's one of the biggest objections from brokers is, I'm worried my client, my buyer, isn't going to like this. This is going to scare them. So absolutely, we have to work on it. And as designated brokers, we need to be staying on top of the changes that are happening in the industry and potential changes so that we're prepared to educate our brokers and continue.
Can't hear you, Lori.
Well, while Lori's getting that fixed, you guys, what comments do you guys have? Rachel, any thoughts?
I
Do
guess
you use buyer's agency agreements?
just, I think that this is an interesting position, just being that it's not standardized. There's no standardized way for a buyer to pay a broker's compensation the way that lending is set up right now. So I think that poses some issues and some pressure points. And I think that if you don't set your buyer up at the beginning with the conversation, then there's going to be brokers that are going to end up getting burned from it because they don't know what the plan is to handle it with their buyer.
So Lori just texted, so she's gonna have to reboot her computer. She's having technical difficulties, and that happens to all of us. So, you know, I hearken back to, you know, we get thrown these curveballs in this industry every year, 6 months, 5 years, and we always seem to adjust. I think the realtors are a resilient bunch. I think that, this is my opinion, that buyers are always going to need you and sellers are always going to need you. I don't care what they throw at you. That's just what has been the constant. But money is only an issue in the absence of value. So if you guys are not having that conversation about how you work, what you do, what services you provide, and basically, you know, it's a chance to toot your own horn without really sounding like you're bragging. You got to do it, because most of the time they just met you. So a lot of that, I don't like talking about myself. Yeah, but they don't know you, right? You know, I belong to Kiwanis. I'm a member of PTA. It doesn't always have to be real estate. I'm involved in the community and stuff like that. But when it evolves to, let me tell you how I get paid. Nancy Brom had a great page in her buyer's book. I'll see if I can find it. It was fantastic. And it was called, Let Me Tell You How I Get Paid. I work, and it said everything. I work on 100% commission only. I only get paid if you buy a house. If you go to an open house, you got to mention I'm working with you. Blah, 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 blah. She had all that written out. And if you guys don't have something like that on your website or your buyer's book or your pamphlet or whatever you're handing out, you're missing the boat. Have a conversation with them, like they said. But it's a good chance for you guys to not only go over how you get paid, and yes, ultimately, I've said this for 30 years. The buyer always pays. It just because it slides on the HUD sheet from the seller to you, it was the buyer's money that funded everybody. Have that conversation. Don't be afraid of it. Right? It's obvious.
I second that, Blake. And I think right now with the shifting market, it's more important than ever to spend the time up front educating the buyer. 30 minutes to an hour can go so much further than wasting time out in the field just showing homes and educating one snippet at a time. You're proving your value, you're proving your worth right up at the front by, showing value proposition. They're not going to leave you if you spend time with them and educate them about the process and, show them your worth, and how you're going to go to battle for them. So.
Right. 100%. Years ago, I was up against on a listing appointment, and I did the CMA, and I sat down with these folks. I went through the CMA. I just didn't show them 3 pages, or I didn't flip it on their kitchen table. So they called me back about 2 or 3 days later, and they said, we'd like you to list the house. So I said, great. So when I went over there, I said, can I ask you why you chose me? And they said, you were the only one to go through your CMA with us. The other 2 agents just gave it to us. So I'm just saying that on the buyer side, don't be afraid not to have a conversation with them. Go over it. Let them know. Educate them. 100% true. A lot of them don't know how you get paid. So Lori, did you get it fixed?
Nope, I'm on Michael's computer. My computer just took a big gray whirly wheel, dead to the world.
Cartwheel in the stand, headstand into the ocean.
So anyway, my apologies, but I should have known when my whole screen went black and then it came back and now it's in the circling spiral of death. So
oh boy,
Where are we? Yeah, so, yeah, that was an interesting video, I thought. I mean, we think we know everything about buyer agency, and then we watch that and
Looks like Lori Christensen has.
Yeah,
her
Lori
hand up.
Christensen either has to go to the restroom or she's got a question.
go ahead, I'm gonna grab my notes.
Okay.
So the timing on this conversation is pretty perfect. I have clients that actually called an owner and asked them if they would sell their house. They were going to go through a lawyer, and the price point is such that there isn't a whole lot of room for commission. So long of the short, the house just went on the market about 20 minutes ago. And the buyers that I've been working with have been identified as excluded buyers. So if I cannot negotiate with the seller for some sort of commission, then what Annie was saying about having the seller pay for closing costs is, a way around that. But if anybody else has any sort of tidbit like that, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I've invited, Tessa's got her hand up. Yeah, she's probably got a question, but let's jump in.
Oh, well, I don't have any I'm just trying to think for Lori, because I had a different thing I was going to say, but
Okay.
So maybe let anybody spitball for Lori with any help. But if your buyers are excluded buyers, then that means the sellers don't want to sell to them. Is that right? Or am I misunderstanding?
No, that means that they can sell to them and not pay a commission.
Yeah,
To
they're not
the-
subject to the listing agreement that they signed.
Got it.
With that specific specified buyer.
Right.
Got it.
And there's usually, if you guys ever run across that, there's usually a time frame that you give it, a window of maybe 2 weeks. I wouldn't give it more than 2 weeks.
I said 10 days. Blake and I are on the exact same page. My argument was they were prepared to pay a listing broker a commission anyway. And so why not just step into that role? Granted, you may not get your entire amount that you would normally get, but you could certainly, I would think, negotiate for the selling side. Have you had a conversation with the buyers about this?
Oh yeah. And I'm meeting with her today. It's been more snippets. It hasn't been eyeball to eyeball. So today we're doing that.
Okay.
And so, going over just the different options. Like I said, we were at 2 million and now we're at 3 million. So I mean, I do understand how there's not a lot of room there. But
is there a window on how long they're excluded?
The listing broker didn't say, but she did say that there's some opportunity to negotiate.
Well, the listing broker doesn't want it either because they get cut out.
Correct.
I mean, it's zero commission on
Right.
excluded buyers.
Right. At least I know the broker, so I think we
Well,
can.
this is where our negotiation skills come in, and just have the
Create your
conversation.
value. Again, create your value. Is the lawyer gonna negotiate for you? Are they gonna meet you at the inspection? Are they gonna meet the appraiser? No, who's gonna do all that? I
Right.
mean, granted, okay, you're talking about a lot of money here, but they just write it
Oh,
up.
and I've gone through all the checklist of everything that that we provide and that. So for me, it's interesting because the sale of this leads to 2 other sales.
Here's the thing I find interesting, Lori, is how uncomfortable this conversation makes you, as opposed to going out on a listing appointment. And while that might be a little uncomfortable, it is not going to be as bad, I don't think, as the butterflies you probably got in your stomach right now. And I think that's what everybody's struggling with on this. I don't know, Mike, you need to. I'm gonna stay here. That's okay. Go. Sorry about that, Michael. He got me back up.
Michael's been booted. Yeah, I do buyer broker agency agreements.
Yeah.
It's,
So what part of
to
this
me,
is
it's not a
making you
big
the most,
deal.
what part of this is making you the most uncomfortable?
Trying to figure out what amount I can ask from the buyers for it to this all to make sense for them, to make it feasible.
Well, you don't have enough information yet, so I think you need more conversation with both the listing broker and your buyer. So you don't have an idea of what your, I call it the bright line. What are you willing to work for and what are you not willing to work for? That's Laura Bird. You got any insight here? And then Tessa, we'll come back. I didn't forget you.
My question or my idea was that they are probably going to update the agency pamphlet when this all kind of rolls out. And they should. It's really old. It hasn't been changed in like 10 years. And when they do that, I think the best time is your first meeting with your buyer, when you first go to meet them, show them this new agency pamphlet and explain the whole process to them. And as far as the amount of commission that Lori should be asking for, I think it depends on the circumstance. Obviously, there's not much wiggle room, but you should try to at least get something, and it doesn't always have to be 3% or 2.5%. If you're, and I don't know what the price point is, but sometimes even 1.5 or 1, or it's not that big of a deal. You're really helping out that client, and you may get referrals down the road, and maybe just kind of, call that your utility money. I don't know.
So I also think, Lori, having the conversation with your buyer about what you feel is your fair compensation in the transaction and what you're willing to do all this work for, and then asking them if they're comfortable for you to try to negotiate that in the offer that you're writing. Like, I mean, I know that's something that Laura's done and has been successful with, and the seller or the buyers are open to her trying to make that offer and presenting it in that way where it is asking the seller to pay or to take that compensation and credit it back.
So where do those terms enter in? Just on the 34?
There's a form that is for the broker's compensation. Yeah. And so that would just be part of the offer that you would write to the seller, and knowing that there is not a compensation offered to you specifically with that buyer, you would write that into the offer. I mean, that would be part of what is negotiated in the offer and presented to the seller. And if the seller likes the offer, then they would agree to the whole offer, or they would counter the offer just like any other offer.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have done that before. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep.
I think the best practice anybody can have on that is call FSBOs and negotiate your fee to bring a buyer. You don't know them from anything, and that's the first thing you can do is practice on the FSBOs and negotiate your value and see if they're willing to pay it.
That's a great point. I'm gonna screen share here for just a second because this is the form. If anybody doesn't know, it's a 41C that Rachel was talking about. Buyer brokerage firms commission addendum, and this has different choices. Buyer brokerage firms compensation, no compensation in listing. Additional buyer brokerage firm compensation. This is for the one that has a $500 listing or selling commission. You do have to have the buyer representation agreement. Buyer brokerage firms commission, no listing agreement. And so this is the form that you would use, whether it's, Blake and I get asked this, whether it's a FSBO or anything else. I don't think I'm screen sharing. Maybe I am.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, you are. You're good.
Sorry. I'm having tech challenges in my brain this morning. So anyway, that one's there. one of the things, do you guys want to hear kind of some conversation, Kelly, Rachel, Tessa, anybody about just kind of what are the main points you hit when you're presenting this buyer agency agreement to people? And I don't expect you to go through your whole presentation. Maybe we can do that another time. But what are some of the highlights, like Rachel, that you hit when you sit down to discuss that with the client? Because you use them as a matter of course, right?
Laura's actually a lot better at using them than I am. So Laura definitely.
Is Laura on this call?
Yeah, I do see her on there. I don't know.
Laura, jump in.
Hi, I'm on here.
Okay.
So I use them a lot as I'm going through the buyer's consultation. We have an inner buyer's book. So it's a form that we let them look at right away when we're meeting with them. And then I just say, you know, after we meet today, if you think it's a good fit and you'd still like to work with me, at some point before we go out and look at houses, I will send this over to you to sign electronically. And it's a good way for you to practice and make sure you are comfortable navigating the e-signing program that we use to write offers. And everyone's usually good with it. So we meet and then I set them up on a search and then I send them the buyer's agency agreement to sign electronically before we go out and look at homes.
So question for you, Laura. So devil's advocate, Laura, we love you. You are awesome. You presented yourself well. We're pre-approved, ready to go, but we're not going to sign that. But we want to work with you.
So I would ask them if they would be comfortable signing it for each house that we look at. And I would say, that's okay if you don't want to sign it. And I let them know that that if they don't want to work with me at any point, I'm not going to hold them to this agreement. I just would, appreciate the conversation to let me know they're going in a different direction. I'm not going to hold them to a contract for 6 months that they have to work with me. If they're not comfortable signing it, I'll let them know that I do require it before I show a property, but I'm fine doing it for each property at a time. So if we're going to go see one house tomorrow, we'll do it for that one house. And then if we want to see another house, we'll do it for another house. Otherwise, I won't work with them. Because if they're not comfortable with it and with me and they don't trust me, then that's red flags already that they're probably going to be difficult clients and I would just rather not work with them. But I've never had that happen. Everybody always is in agreement to sign it.
I mean, it's a personal choice. I know in Seattle, it's non-negotiable.
Tessa nails it. Let Tessa do her spiel. I love it every single time.
Well, I was going to ask Blake, I was going to say to continue to be devil's advocate. So Blake, tell me why you're not comfortable signing the buyer agency agreement.
I just don't want to hitch my horse to one realtor. I just don't really, I mean, I want to work with you and stuff, but if I happen to go in a different direction, then, but Laura's right. It is a red flag, but
so are you, are you working with other realtors right now?
I wanted to get a buyer's agency signed. The guy says, I'm not going to sign one. I sold him a condo the next day. So it's a personal.
I love it. Tessa wants to role play right now. Let's do it, Tessa.
I know Blake's not doing it.
I'm not comfortable signing it, Tessa. I've worked with other agents in the past and, they've never made me sign that agreement.
No, I get it. I mean, there's a ton that don't make you sign it, but I'm curious, are you working with other agents right now?
Well, I'm really good. When I'm out shopping, if I see a house that I like, I'll call the number on the sign and, sometimes they pick up and sometimes they let me in.
Yeah. So do you know who that number on the sign goes to?
I'm not totally sure.
Yeah. So that's the listing agent. So that goes to the person who the seller has hired to sell their house for them. So when you call them, who's
wouldn't they know the most about the house though? Wouldn't they know the most about the house to let me in?
Point.
They do. They probably do. But whose best interest do you think they have in mind? Do you think that they're going to advocate for you, or do you think they're going to advocate for the seller who's hired them to sell their house?
Well, I think they might have the seller's best interests.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. So part of the buyer's agency agreement, if you decide to sign and you decide to hire me, that means that you've hired me to advocate for your best interest. And so what I'm going to do is you drive by and you see that sign, go ahead and give me a call. I'm going to call that listing agent and I will get all of the information that they have on that property. The benefit is You've chosen to hire me. And so I will advocate for you, and I'm going to work for you to get you into that house.
So what am I committed to though if I sign this form with you?
Awesome question. So the buyer agency agreement, it's going to cover compensation, location, and duration. 3 things. So it's going to cover my compensation. When you hire me to help you find a house, I get paid for that. I get paid typically by the seller, and I get paid at closing. So you don't have to pay me ahead of time, but it comes out of payment at the end. So like I said, typically the seller is going to offer a compensation. If the seller doesn't offer my compensation, the buyer agency agreement is going to allow me to negotiate with them on your behalf. On the rare instance that I can't negotiate for my compensation, you will be required to make up the difference. I've only had that happen once or twice. We're always going to have that conversation if it comes up, so you'll know ahead of time. But it does allow me to negotiate for my compensation. Location, I only work Skagit and Whatcom County, so this agreement will cover those 2 counties. If you decide to go outside of my area, I'll help you hire an agent and interview that process so we can find you someone in the other location. And then duration, we sign for 4 months. In this market, if I can't get you into a house within 4 months, we're not doing something right. Something's missing. So we're going to reassess at that point. Maybe we've decided it's not a good fit or we need to change your goals, but we'll reassess after that 4 months.
So Tessa, what I'm hearing is it sounds like at that point, then you and I are committed together to working together. And it sounds like I'm going to get some amazing service by signing that buyer's agency agreement.
Yep, that is spot on.
So I can call you on weekends and evenings at 2 a.m. and tell you there's a house that just hit the market and you're going to show it to me, right, baby?
You can. You can call me at 2 a.m. It's gonna go straight to voicemail. I said do not disturb, but I totally get that where you see something and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to text Tessa so that I don't forget. And I promise as soon as I wake up in the morning, you're gonna be my first phone call. The other thing, one last thing. So when you do sign, that puts you as part of my preferred buyer program. And so that means you're gonna get the first call back. I have some people that kind of work together. They haven't signed them. They're not on my preferred buyer program, so they don't get the first call back. This puts you in position to get the first call back. So you think you want to sign? You want to hire me? Do you want to work together?
What? I love VIP service. It's like shopping at Nordstrom. So sign me up, baby. Let's go.
Okay, you got it.
That was amazing. Good job, Tessa.
Tessa.
I've had practice with Kelly before, so it was a little, but yeah,
obviously
fun to play with.
Not her first rodeo, but a lot of things that she covered. I love the compensation, location, duration. Just boom, it fell right out of her mouth. And what Annie had pointed out is when you're working, when you call that listing broker, you can't advocate for either party if they're a dual agent. They can't advocate for you. They got confidentiality. They can't tell you anything. They can't tell you what to offer. They can't tell you what the terms should be. They really just kind of become a scribe. I love that.
I think, and the one thing I want to point out I think it's really easy for us to say, if you want to work with me, I think when you hire me, right, you're going to hire me as your buyer's agent. So when I take a listing, when a seller hires me to sign or to sell their house, I'm going to sign a contract. It's the same thing when I work with buyers. If you choose to hire me, because I think that puts it's another way to reframe that, like, this is a job. I do this for a living. This isn't a fun hobby where like, ooh, let's go look at houses. You are choosing to hire me to represent you in the transaction. Not work with me, work together, right? Like those like really soft, easy words. If you want to hire me, you're going to sign a contract to hire me.
So did
it's an employment contract, if you will.
Totally. 100%.
Did anybody else, this was like a light bulb going off when Annie said to ask the seller to pay the buyer closing costs, and out of those buyer closing costs, they would pay your additional compensation. I had never even, I don't know, maybe I'm just really slow, but I had never thought about that before, because our main concern has always been we can't roll the commission into the financing, right? But you
That's
can
going to be the
certainly
roadblock.
You can ask him to pay closing costs, and those closing costs they're not tied to the financing. If you read that paragraph, you can use them for anything. You can use them for prepaids. You can use them for whatever you want.
I think the lending institution that incorporates that is going to have a stampede to their front door once this changes.
It's going to be Fannie and Freddie that are going to have to come to the party. And
well, yeah, that's right.
You're right. You're 100% right.
Well, it's a good savvy and WAFD. I mean, it's a good portfolio lender hook. Right? We don't respond to Fannie and Freddie. We make our own rules because it's our own money.
But did anybody, like I said, converting it to buyer closing costs and then having the additional commission paid out of that? Anybody have any thoughts on that? I thought it was brilliant.
Well, how is it different to the seller? I mean, like, is the seller?
Because you're not, I guess because you're not calling it out solely as compensation, they can use, part of that for your compensation. They can use part of it to pay their insurance, whatever.
I guarantee you, we will get around it. We always do.
Thoughts on that, Rach? You were going to say something.
Well, my thought before that was that one thing I wanted to point out, Tessa uses this verbiage, and I think that we all should try to think more in the mindset of when we're talking about our compensation, it is our compensation, not a commission, because commission has kind of like a faux pas feeling around it. So when you talk about your fair compensation or the compensation that you're going to pay me for my services, rather than our commission, it just has a better, more professional, polished presentation to your client and doesn't feel so, I don't know. To me, I'm really into how words make people feel when I talk to them. And I just think that it's a really good word to work into your vocabulary when you're talking about your compensation. So that was just one thing I wanted to note to everybody.
And on the 41A, it says compensation.
Yeah.
It doesn't say commission.
Right.
Well, and I think compensation, people feel like compensation is earned, whereas commission is given. And like, that's the difference in my mind, where I'm going to earn my compensation. Commission just feels like, oh, you're just going to get this for whatever. Compensation is compensation for work done.
Well, and
like, you want to give, oh, go ahead.
I've turned it around when clients are talking to me and asking me what I charge for my commission. And I turn it around and say, my compensation is, and it's like, oh, I mean, it really does give a different feeling when you're talking about it in that way.
Blake, do you want to give us a quick explanation of excluded buyers?
Well, if you're a listing agent, I could just, okay, so let me back up. An excluded buyer is somebody that has an interest and they have a relationship with that seller already, most likely, and they want to buy it. And so that's pretty much a built-in buyer that the listing agent has not found. The seller has found. So the seller does not want to pay a commission because they found this buyer. So neither party gets paid. There's zero commission paid on excluded buyers. Now, rewind the conversation with the listing agent and you're at the table and they tell you, yeah, the guy next door wants to buy it. He's wanted to buy it, blah, blah, blah. Well, I would, before you start spending money on photographs and drone photographs and staging and then you're going to say, all right, you got 10 days. If you can't buy it in 10 days or enter, I'm out, but I'm not going to list it and spend my money. And 10 days later, this excluded buyer pulls the rug out and now I'm out all this money. So we'll exclude this buyer. Don't you have to write their name in the agent remarks or something, Rachel?
You have to note that there is an excluded buyer in the confidential remarks and how long. So excluded buyer until August 1st or whatever.
Don't you have to write their name though?
It has to be on an addendum that is signed, but that's not open.
Okay, I thought.
I'm not 100% sure. I got to be honest with you.
I think I called the MLS on this one time, and I think that they do recommend sending something into them with the excluded buyer information, but that it's not, there's not a clear path on what needs to take place.
Right. Doesn't happen that often, just to be honest with you. You'll see in the agent remarks if there's an excluded buyer, and you guys can You know,
You can, I think you can usually talk the seller out of it. I think Blake's absolutely right, because you are disincentivized from doing any kind of marketing or spending any money if somebody else can just step in off the sidelines and you're not going to get paid. So I think it's an easy objection to overcome if you know what it is and are kind of prepared for it.
Listen, it's going to cost me 500 photographs. And it's going to cost me a couple grand to stage it. So if you want to write me a check right now for 2,500, then we'll exclude them. And I'll give it back to you if they don't buy it at closing. They're going to just stop right dead in their tracks. Just screw that guy. Let's list it. They don't want to write a check.
Right.
But it's the only fair thing.
Yeah.
So in this situation, there's nothing uploaded or in broker remarks.
Yes, there is in the broker remarks. It says 1 or 2 excluded buyers.
Lori's saying on her particular listing that she was trying to sell.
It should be in the agent remarks, but if they have to send something.
And they have to note it. It has to be in the confidential remarks that there's excluded buyers, Lori. So you might.
Yeah, call the MLS, Lori. And
seller can't just say, I have an excluded buyer, 2 days after it's listed because somebody grabbed a flyer out front and they became friends. That's what you're trying to avoid.
The only thing it says is only qualified buyers.
Yeah, once they list that in the MLS, then it becomes a property that you can represent a buyer. If they do not have an excluded buyer listed there, then they do not have excluded buyers.
Correct.
Any buyer can be represented by a broker who is a party to the MLS, and that compensation that is offered is what is offered.
Okay.
You don't want to go in there, and piss them off.
No, just write the offer.
Yeah. Just write the offer.
So call the MLS, ask if they have any documentation.
Ask them what the rules are. Yeah, about excluded buyers. Inquire generally about excluded buyers, find out what the rules are, and then write the offer.
Yeah, just exactly. Call the MLS. Say, look, my clients are interested in this. They say there's an excluded buyer, but there's nothing listed on the confidential agent remarks. Can you tell me, is there anything on this file that they have an excluded buyer? That's their job. Multiple is, it's a Brinks truck, right?
Thank you.
What else did we have over there? Lindsay was asking, how much is it worth to you to get those 2 trailing? Can you wrap some payment into those? This is my personal opinion, and anybody else welcome to jump in. I don't like rolling your commission forward into future transactions, because I've seen too many times, Lindsay, when those future transactions don't happen, their neighbor comes over and knocks on their door, says, we've always wanted to own your house. And they call you up and go, oh yeah, I know you were going to list it and we were going to pay you out of that, but you know what? I don't even need an agent anymore. I don't need a broker. My neighbor's buying it, and you get nothing.
That's why you always get it on the first. You get full boat on the first transaction. Yep. Just on the you'll get it on the second one, but the first one you're going to pay full take. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about that because I've seen it happen.
Oh God, doesn't it though?
Too many times. And then it's like, gosh, we're really sorry, but yeah.
It just happened. It was so quick. We were just doing a Sunday drive.
Yeah. I was looking for another one. There is an actual termination of agency. I had it pulled up on my other computer, but if you didn't know it was there, it's a termination of buyer agency agreement. And
just like a listing, though, it does say if you buy something that I showed you, and then in the following 6 months, then I'm due a commission.
Yep.
So I'm just curious, though, Lori, because I don't know the answer to this. Okay. So it has that same language, just like it has in a conditional release listing, unless they get listed with another MLS broker, then all bets are off. Seller doesn't have to pay 2 commissions. Is that the case here if they sign a buyer's agency agreement with another MLS agent? You would think so.
Yeah, if I could find the cancellation, I'd be able to tell you.
Basically, so the buyer doesn't have to pay 2 commissions.
I don't think the multiple is ever going to put a client or in the position of having to pay 2 commissions, but my guess is that they're revamping the rules that it's like the listing, so that's true unless the new broker agrees to do it at a greatly reduced, and they're only doing that to get around
Right.
paying you a commission, which is
Right. You would actually know the difference, but let's say it's,
right. Yeah,
I don't know the answer. I'm just curious.
and I can't find it either. I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's
like
very
I said,
ambiguous on that conditional release. Sellers get spooked. I mean, the language,
I don't
know
like-
why they're not more clear.
I don't know why they can't revamp that. It's in
know.
desperate need because you and I deal with it all the time. So just wrapping up over here in the comments. So Debbie, hopefully we have covered how to explain to buyers with limited funds, they won't have to pay you in the event the seller won't pay. You know, you can roll it into closing costs, but you do need to be compensated because there are the MLS for, you know, by owner $500 SOC out there. So yeah, the role play was great. Questions and comments on that? I'm not going to have a lot of time to go cover my other things I was going to cover.
Lori, I would say one other thing for Debbie. There's lots of ways to get creative. And sometimes I've even done where like we offer, it's like closing, it's like financing your closing costs, right? So we offer a little bit higher offer price. And then we have I have my buyer agency agreement. And so like I think if you explain it, like if the seller's paying closing costs, but those closing costs are just my compensation. So I've had FSBOs where we offer 10,000 more, and then the seller is going to pay 2.5% commission to me, right? And so we just roll it in. Now, obviously, it has to appraise, but normally, you know, and we have that conversation. Hey, if it doesn't appraise, what's that going to look like? But I think there's lots of ways to get creative, and sometimes it's like, you know, if this is the dream house, I'm not going to stand in the way between you and you getting your dream house. And so we'll figure out something, you know, maybe you're going to send me a referral or, you know, whatever it is, but there's, you know, you just go through all the options and get creative.
Yeah, it's, and again, I'm circling back to the bright line conversation that I think every single person on this call should sit down either by themselves or with their team members and say, what is our minimum compensation that we will work for in different scenarios? Because when you don't want to be figuring that out is when you're sitting there with a buyer who either says, I don't have any money, I can't afford to pay over. That's not the time to say, oh, gee, let me think about it. Figure out your different scenarios, figure out what your value is, figure out what you're worth. And if it goes beyond that, you can always use Blake or I as the bad guy and say, you know what, I would love to do it for that, but I really need to check with the owner of the company. I don't have that authorization to do so. And on more than one occasion, I know I've been a bad guy. I'm sure Blake has as well when it comes to something like that. Because this is our living. I mean, we're going into a different market again. We're going into our shift. And
Lori's right. You gotta kind of know your worth, right? As my dad always said, you know, if somebody's going to pay you $5 an hour and the other guy's going to pay you $2. I mean, you got to know your worth, and you got to kind of stick to your guns a little bit. You know, Delisa was up against a listing appointment last week, and there were 3 agents, came down to her and a Redfin agent. So I can say that, I think.
Yeah, this is private.
Who was willing to do for less. And it was only a half a point. And Delisa said no. And they said, well, we really want you. We want you. And she said no. She's not going to do it for that. So they said, well, let us talk about it and we'll call. And they called the next day and they were willing to pay a half point more to have Delisa, but she stuck to her guns. I need new golf clubs, by the way.
So here I found the form. I finally found the form. So I'm going to share this really quick. This is your termination of buyer representation. It's a form 53. And it does have, it looks like the exact same verbiage of a termination of listing if the buyer within 6 months purchases a property during the term of the agreement that was brought to the attention to the actions of the firm or information, a property that the buyer inquired about to the firm, then the buyer shall pay the firm compensation provided for in the agreement, provided if a commission is paid to another real estate firm representing buyer in conjunction with such a sale, the amount of commission payable shall be reduced by the amount paid to the other firm.
Okay, so there it is.
There it is. It's the gobbledygook. So if you said 3% and they go buy through somebody else for 2%, then technically you would be entitled to the difference or the 1%. Am I reading that right, Blake?
Yes, typically there's not. I mean, it's usually not a full point, even if it's just a half point, it's just not worth fighting for. But
Oh.
the language is in there, just like on a conditional release listing that says you don't pay two buyers twice.
Right. Right. So there it is. This is just a form for convenience. The representation can be terminated by either party. So it's just like a listing agreement. I don't need the seller's, Blake and I don't need the seller's signature to terminate a listing, or at least pull it off of the multiple. It's rare that we do go after people for commission, but we do have one going right now down at Gateway that we're trying to decide what we're going to do. We had sellers just literally throw up their hands and walk away at closing. So there's some fun deals going on out in the world right now. There just are. Be heads up. So yeah.
So another thing that I've learned over the years too, which I don't know if anybody on my team's using it as a high level, is a loyalty agreement. It is something you can put in a buyer's agent packet along with the buyer's agent agreement, which basically spells out what you're offering them, and in return, what the buyer is going to commit to you to do as well. So it's kind of like a mini agreement outside of that you could attach to the buyer's agency form, telling them exactly what you're going to do for them.
So can you give me just an idea of a couple things that might be on that agreement?
Sure. So some of the benefits with working with a team is we will assist you in securing best financing programs for your situation, automatically email you properties that match your criteria. I'm just going to go through this quickly. Arrange private showings of properties you want to see, including new construction and FSBOs. When you find a property, we'll use our experience to discuss strategy regarding price, financing, possession terms, information about the home, presenting offers on your behalf to negotiate in your best interest, guide you through the necessary steps, including appraisal, inspection, insurance, communication, title, blah, blah, blah. Available to answer any of your questions. And in return, Mr. Buyer, you're willing to seek approval from a lender and approve of funds for cash transactions. Notify us of any listings you wish to preview. Have a member of our team formulate an offer. Acknowledge that a broker is being retained solely as a real estate agent and not a tax attorney, blah, blah, blah. This agreement expires in 90 days from today's date. It will automatically renew every 30 days unless parties notify that they want to terminate in writing.
That's awesome. Loyalty agreement and spelling it out in plain old English.
It shows your worth.
100%. And I think that's something, again, that we need to start working harder on our scripts and knowing our value and knowing our worth. And we really shouldn't be surprised by some questions that we know we're going to get. And yet I think some people are. So if you do nothing else, if you write down the 5 most common objections you think you're going to get to a buyer brokerage agreement or a buyer agency agreement, and talk to role play, call Tessa, call somebody, and let's figure out the answers ahead of time and then work them into your dialogue so they become you. Yeah.
I mean, I would make it mandatory. I mean, Kelly, that your buyer's agent, that has to absolutely be memorized.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you just, that has to be memorized, and then, they don't want you to read it or email it, but if it's memorized.
I think that goes back to also summarizing the purchase and sale agreement and contingencies, right? If you can nail that in certain sentences, when we used to have to present in person, which I used to do all the time back in the day, I had every paragraph memorized down to like a sentence as to basically what it meant to the buyer, and so it's kind of the same thing when it goes to selling yourself and your worth. You need to have that memorized too. And you're exactly right, Blake. You don't need to read it. You need to just basically summarize and tell them what it is so they understand your value proposition for sure.
Okay. Wow. Great roundtable this morning. This was good. What I would like to hit on, or what we've talked about maybe hitting on in the future, is price reductions and listings that sit longer than 24 hours and don't get 87 offers for $1 million over the ask price. Let's work on that a little bit. Let's talk about that. I'd love to have the input of the people that work on that a lot, because again, shifting market back to normal. And if there's any other topics that you guys would like us to talk about, reach out to Blake or I, let us know. And we're happy to throw them in there. I am going to be doing another contract class coming up. Yeah, I know, at popular demand. I'm going to do it like I did last time. It'll be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday. Boom, fire hose time. And even if you think you know everything about contracts, it's contract mastery. And I guarantee you the time will be worthwhile. You will pick something up from every single class we do. So mastery is going to be the name of the game to survive in this market we got coming up. And that's why we're here. So, all right. Okay, we ran a little bit over, well worth it. Thank you to everybody who chimed in. Thanks for your questions and thanks for your patience with my technology challenges as I take over Michael's office. And yeah, we'll see you soon.